Let's go live now, of course, to more on this with Risenga Maluleke, the Statistician-General, going to hand over those results in just a moment. The official count was done to assess how many people live in the country and what housing and other facilities they require. The previous census, conducted 12 years ago. Joined now by our business editor, our numbers guy, Xolani Mbanjwa, to tell us what the numbers were revealed 10 years ago and how things may have changed. Xolani, good afternoon to you. Why is the census so important?
Stephen, good afternoon. The census is very important, particularly for the 230-odd municipalities and the planning that they have to do. And if you look at the census from 1996 to the first census in 1996 to 2001, and from 2001 to 2011, the big demarcation changes, the big migration, inward migration of people requires that municipalities plan around where people live, where people need services. And that's the major one. And also the second big one is the reason why we spent in 2022 2.1 billion rand in 2 months, hiring 120,000 enumerators to count people digitally, which was the first time. Is the IEC has to plan their demarcations as well ahead of elections based on where people live. So this is quite important for any country, and we should be proud that we have a statistics office like this, which rivals many around the world and is considered the best on the continent.
If you go back to 2011, what were the main findings? I mean, it's a long time ago now. A lot's changed, a lot hasn't.
So a lot has changed, and it's something that was quite interesting in 2011 is that the population change, if you can look at that graphic we're going to show you, the population change from 2001 to 2011 was just above 7 million people. So we added 7 million people in 10 years. So this time around, between 2011 and 2022, we should expect at least to add about 10 million people if you're using those calculations. And if you look from the first census in 1996, there were just over 40 million. And when you look at 2001, just under 45 million. And the last one in 2011, it was 51.7 million people who were calculated. These are non-residents, these are illegal immigrants, these are South African naturalized, these were born. Everyone is counted. And there are mini censuses every 5 years, and that's why we know today that we are standing at between 55 and 56 million. And if we move on to look at the specifics now of the things that we look at when it comes to the provincially, we can see that the population for race, if you look at something quite interesting, this is 2001 census, and that was 8.9. The population for was 9.6 rather. The population for white South Africans, it was 9.6. That drastically changed when you look at 1996, and if you look at 2011, that has drastically changed too. And it's something that is quite. If we move on to 2011, there it is 8.9, and those are massive changes. And you're looking at telling a story of South Africa, a beautiful country, but what is there in South Africa? And this tells us that the majority of South Africans are black African or were black Africans in 2011, something that would have to have changed. And the smaller minorities, they don't change that much, but the interesting part is the change in the white population. Let's go on to look at the others in terms of access to services. When it comes to non-South Africans in 2011, 3.3% of people who were counted in 2011 were non-South Africans. So it actually questions that story of South Africa having this influx of foreign nationals, which is not the case. As many as 7.4, however, of people counted in Gauteng in 2011 were non South African citizens, and Gauteng, of course, being the capital of the country in terms of financially, it is important that you notice that these are economic migrants. And if we move on to the other stats that we have, the citizenship, you will see there that South African citizens, when you look at the total, 99.1% were South African citizens, only 0.9%. It again questions that influx story of migrants and immigrants, and that's because we see it in Limpopo mostly and Gauteng, because people are coming through those borders. If we move on to the other important stuff now, how many households have toilets and so forth, is still coming. This is quite interesting when you look at 1996. 19% of South Africans did not have any schooling at all. If you look at that figure, that was 1996. If you look at that figure in 2001, that number went down 17.9%. If you go down to 2011, that number really went down. South Africans went out to get skilled and educated, 8.7%. That number should be lower for those who have no education whatsoever. And when you look at something that is interesting as well is higher education. One of the reasons that we see the quarterly labor force survey telling us that those who are unemployable do not have grade 12. It's because of these statistics that we see. It tells a story that those who have higher education in 1996, higher than grade 12, were 7.1%. And although the number is creeping up, it's not creeping up at a fast enough pace, Stephen, because 2001, it was sitting at post-matric qualifications at 8.4% of the population. 2011, 12.3% of the population had post-matric qualifications. Tells a story about an unskilled population and a population that is unemployable. So there is a lot that you can glean from 2011 as far as that is concerned. But if you move on to the services as well, it actually speaks, this graphic actually speaks to the unemployment rate. And if you look at 2011 specifically, don't we wish we could go back to that far right number of 23.9% unemployment rate in 2011? We know that we are sitting at 32.4% right now. So it's runaway unemployment, really. It's something that is quite serious when you look at the fact that although those who are educated have graduated and have post-matric qualifications, they are not getting jobs because our unemployment rate is now above the 30s. If we move on to the other findings of that, this one is quite interesting. The flushing toilets. How many households had flushing toilets? I can't see that number, but in terms of flushing toilet, it was sitting at around 74%. Those households that had flushing toilets, and if you look at the pit toilets, 19%. Still, that's a big number in 2011. Bucket toilet system that the former President Thabo Mbeki tried to actually eradicate was still there in 2011, long after he had vacated the Union buildings where we are today. The bucket toilet system standing at 2%, the pit toilet with ventilation 9%, and that other 2%, it's people who use the felt. Yeah. That's what they say, and none at all, it's 5%. So these are quite interesting in telling a story of South Africa and which provinces need development the most. And if you look at 2011 numbers, the Northern Cape is the province that needs the most support.
There's so many other interesting things here, because one of the things we'll see in this census is how many people have moved.
Yes.
Right? And I mean, the percentages are important, the increases in population are important, but how many people have moved? And they will have moved from probably rural areas and sort of more rural provinces, to probably urban areas and more urban provinces. So in some provinces they'll have moved to the big city in that province. In some they'll have moved to the big city in the next province. So they might have moved to eMalahleni, or they might have moved to Johannesburg, or they might have moved to the Western Cape, or they might have moved to Gqeberha. And this is going to be very interesting because we know from other numbers that there's a large number of people moving into our cities at the moment, especially after COVID.
Yes, absolutely. And surprisingly, Gauteng is number one province to move to. The Western Cape is number two. And Mpumalanga, because of its agricultural and mining sectors, that's where most people move to. Whether it's a migration from within South Africa or people coming off from Lesotho, Swaziland, and other neighboring countries, Zimbabwe, they move to those three provinces the most. And you will see here, when it comes to the Western Cape, they are actually sitting at the change. If you look at the percentage change in terms of population growth between 1996, 2001 and 2011, you will see that the Western Cape grew by 14.3% between 1996 and 2001, and it was Gauteng that was still number one at 19.8% in that period, and KwaZulu-Natal was at 11.8%. And if you look at 2011, between 2001 and 2011, Gauteng was still number one at 30.7% population growth, followed by the Western Cape at 28.7%, and then Mpumalanga at 20%. I would never have thought that so many people moved to Mpumalanga, but it's because of the agricultural sector and the mining sector.
Right, more on these numbers. We expect that live event to begin with President Cyril Ramaphosa in just a moment. Wait now, the announcement of the Census 2022. I realize it's 2023, but it does take a lot of time to put all of those numbers together. We do expect the Statistician-General to give them to hand them over to the President in just a moment. In the meantime, our business editor, Xolani Mbanjwa, going through some of the previous results of the previous census with us. They are fascinating to see what they can tell us. Xolani, energy is such a big story in so many different ways. Some of the numbers on that are fascinating.
Absolutely, and it's something that is interesting that by 2011, we were already on load shedding. The country was already being load shed, but the interesting thing is the access to electricity that has grown tremendously. But if the first administration of Nelson Mandela, the previous statement, the late statesman, did not read the 1996 census, it would have told them that we needed new power stations immediately, judging by how many people were signing up for electricity. And if you look at these numbers from 2011, 74% of the country had access to electricity, and they were using that for cooking. Now, this is quite interesting because you've got gas 3%, paraffin 9%, wood 13%. And this does not mean, Stephen, that if you have electricity for lighting, you will have electricity for cooking or a heating water source.
And also the figures for cooking on weekends during big sports matches can be different.
Yes, and that is wood. Most of it is just price. But it just shows the massive increase in terms of electricity demand from both the business side and the household side, that from 1996 to 2001 and 2011, the demand has been tremendous. And the fact that we are sitting at a point now that we have load shedding, and that it's because of one of the reasons that have been given, I should say, is the increase in demand, and the fact that we haven't planned properly in terms of our population growth. If we had read this in the mid-90s, in that first administration, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Well, the people who drafted the 1998 white paper did read it, but no one read the white paper.
Exactly, no one wanted to read it. But there's more. There are more other interesting findings as well when you look at internet access in the country. When you look at the percentage of distribution of households with access to internet, and you're looking here at the 2011 number, and 64% still in 2011, a year after the 2010 World Cup, you're still looking at just under 65% of South African households that did not have access to internet whatsoever. And how they use the internet in terms of home, only 8.6% in 2011.
So back in 2011, if you had a cell phone with internet, you were on edge.
You were on edge,
right?
Exactly.
You know?
You were on edge. And where did most people access, other people access their internet? So if you're looking at this number of 5.6%, it's elsewhere, but work was 4.7%. No access to internet in 2011, 64.8% had no access to internet, something that we take for granted today.
So now every single person in the country who's on WhatsApp has access to internet.
Yes.
So if you just look at that penetration, you'll see such a big change, I'm sure, in the last 12 years.
And many handsets today have access to the internet. And when you look at the African continent, compared to all the other continents, there are more cell phones on this continent. They calculated saying for every one person on the continent, there are 2 cell phones. So now we have done well in this particular infrastructure because we have access to internet. Now it's just making it cheaper. But let's talk about something that we take even for granted even more, and that's access to the radio. And if you look at the 2011 statistics, you will show that it will show that it has decreased, and that's people migrating from the radio being their source of information to the internet, and the proliferation of internet news sites being their source of information. Facebook, Twitter, now called X, and other social media websites. Something that is quite interesting, but still in 2011, the people who had access to the internet did not even reach 90%. It was not even that much when you look at that. But I guess, Stephen, we have to go to the union buildings because there might be an announcement being made quite soon.
Vincent Maluleke, the spokesperson for the president, is now on the... Vincent Mbanjwa, gosh, listen to me. Vincent.